Welcome to Framework, the podcast that makes the NIST cybersecurity framework practical, engaging, and accessible. Whether you're a cybersecurity professional, business leader, or simply curious about how organizations defend against cyber threats, this series is for you. This podcast is inspired by a comprehensive guide to the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0, a best-selling resource written by cybersecurity expert Dr. Jason Edwards and trusted by professionals worldwide. In each episode, we'll leverage a few insights from Jason's extensive book to dive deep into CSF 2.0, unpacking every function, category, and subcategory with real-world applications you can immediately use. If you're enjoying this episode and want to learn more, head over to cyberauthor.me to grab your copy of the book and access additional resources to enhance your cybersecurity journey. You can also visit baremetalcyber.com, where over 2 million people last year explored expert insights, articles, and practical tools across a wide range of cybersecurity topics. GV.SC-05, Setting Cybersecurity Requirements for Suppliers. GV.SC-05 ensures that organizations establish clear and enforceable cybersecurity requirements for suppliers, ensuring that third-party vendors adhere to defined security standards, risk management protocols, and compliance obligations. This subcategory belongs to the govern function within the National Institute of Standards and Technology Cybersecurity Framework version 2.0, emphasizing that supply chain security must be proactively managed by defining cybersecurity expectations for suppliers, reducing the risk of third-party vulnerabilities, impacting organizational security posture. Without structured cybersecurity requirements for suppliers, organizations risk working with vendors that lack adequate security controls, increasing the likelihood of data breaches, operational disruptions, and compliance violations. By setting cybersecurity requirements for suppliers, organizations ensure that third-party security obligations align with internal cybersecurity policies, regulatory frameworks, and industry best practices. A structured approach to supplier security requirements allows organizations to create consistent security expectations across all vendors, enforce standardized security controls, and mitigate supply chain cyber risks effectively. Organizations that define formal cybersecurity requirements for vendors, enforce third-party compliance verification processes, and integrate supplier security policies into procurement and contracting frameworks improve their ability to detect, prevent, and respond to supply chain security threats proactively. Multiple stakeholders play a role in setting cybersecurity requirements for suppliers. Executive leadership and procurement teams are responsible for establishing supplier cybersecurity policies, defining contractual security clauses, and ensuring vendor security compliance aligns with business risk management strategies. Cybersecurity and risk management teams conduct third-party security assessments, monitor supplier cybersecurity performance, and enforce security requirements for high-risk vendors. Legal and compliance officers ensure that supplier cybersecurity requirements align with national and international regulatory obligations, industry security mandates, and contractual compliance frameworks, reducing exposure to supplier legal and security risks. Cybersecurity requirements for suppliers are established through formalized security policy frameworks, contractual security enforcement mechanisms, and continuous vendor security compliance monitoring. This includes defining supplier security policies in procurement contracts, requiring vendors to meet predefined security standards, and conducting periodic supplier security audits to ensure compliance with cybersecurity expectations. Organizations that fail to set cybersecurity requirements for suppliers risk engaging with vendors that lack adequate security protections, failing regulatory security assessments, and increasing the likelihood of supply chain cyber incidents. Several key terms define cybersecurity requirements for suppliers and their role in supply chain risk management. Supplier security compliance frameworks ensure that organizations set enforceable security policies that vendors must adhere to as part of contractual obligations. Third-party risk management (TPRM) standards require organizations to evaluate supplier security risks and enforce structured security requirements across the vendor ecosystem. Security control enforcement for vendors ensures that suppliers implement minimum security measures, such as encryption, access controls, and incident response protocols. Regulatory compliance for suppliers mandates that vendor security requirements align with industry security frameworks and legal cybersecurity standards. Continuous supplier security audits enable organizations to verify supplier security compliance through structured security assessments, real-time monitoring, and cybersecurity risk reporting mechanisms. Challenges in setting cybersecurity requirements for suppliers often lead to inconsistent vendor security enforcement, weak contractual cybersecurity obligations, and failure to align supplier security policies with enterprise risk management strategies. One common issue is lack of standardized cybersecurity requirements across vendors, where organizations fail to establish consistent security expectations, leading to gaps in supply chain security governance. Another issue is failure to enforce cybersecurity requirements for high-risk vendors, where suppliers handling sensitive data or critical infrastructure lack adequate security oversight. Some organizations mistakenly believe that supplier cybersecurity should be the vendor's responsibility alone, without recognizing that organizations must actively define, enforce, and monitor vendor security obligations to mitigate third-party cybersecurity risks. When organizations set structured cybersecurity requirements for suppliers, they enhance supply chain security resilience, improve vendor cybersecurity compliance, and ensure that supplier cybersecurity risks are proactively managed. A well-defined supplier cybersecurity policy ensures that vendor security expectations are clearly outlined, supplier compliance is continuously monitored, and supplier security governance remains aligned with enterprise risk management strategies. Organizations that define supplier cybersecurity requirements in procurement contracts, enforce vendor compliance verification processes, and integrate supplier security policies into enterprise cybersecurity governance develop a comprehensive supply chain risk management framework that strengthens third-party security oversight and reduces supply chain cyber risks effectively. Organizations that fail to set clear cybersecurity requirements for suppliers face significant security, operational, and compliance risks. Without structured vendor security obligations, organizations risk working with suppliers that lack essential cybersecurity controls, increasing the probability of supply chain cyber incidents, regulatory noncompliance, and operational disruptions. A common issue is inconsistent cybersecurity enforcement among vendors, where organizations require some suppliers to adhere to strict security policies while allowing others to operate with minimal security oversight, creating vulnerabilities within the supply chain. Another major challenge is lack of contractual cybersecurity obligations, where organizations engage vendors without specifying security requirements in procurement contracts, leading to difficulties in enforcing cybersecurity expectations. By setting formal cybersecurity requirements for suppliers, organizations ensure that vendor security policies align with business risk management strategies, industry cybersecurity frameworks, and regulatory compliance obligations. A well-defined supplier security governance model enhances visibility into vendor security risks, standardizes cybersecurity enforcement across the supply chain, and ensures that third-party security risks are mitigated effectively. Organizations that establish supplier security policy frameworks, enforce contractual security compliance requirements, and integrate vendor cybersecurity risk assessments into enterprise risk management strategies improve their ability to detect, prevent, and mitigate third-party cybersecurity risks efficiently. At the partial tier, organizations lack formal supplier security policies, leading to unstructured vendor security enforcement, minimal third-party security compliance monitoring, and weak alignment between supplier security governance and enterprise risk management. Vendor security policies are handled inconsistently, with organizations only addressing supplier security risks reactively after security incidents occur. A small business at this level may rely on software vendors or cloud providers without specifying cybersecurity requirements, increasing exposure to third-party security vulnerabilities. At the risk-informed tier, organizations begin to develop structured cybersecurity requirements for suppliers, ensuring that vendor security policies are documented and partially enforced. However, supplier security enforcement efforts may still be limited, with inconsistent application of cybersecurity requirements across different vendor categories. A mid-sized financial institution at this level may require data processing vendors to meet security compliance standards, but fail to apply the same level of security enforcement to software providers, creating security gaps in supply chain risk management. At the repeatable tier, organizations implement a fully structured vendor cybersecurity requirement framework, ensuring that supplier security policies are standardized, third-party security compliance is continuously enforced, and vendor security governance aligns with enterprise risk management strategies. Supplier security governance is formalized, with leadership actively involved in reviewing vendor security requirements and ensuring alignment with regulatory compliance obligations. A healthcare organization at this stage may require all third-party electronic health record service providers, cloud vendors, and medical device manufacturers to comply with strict cybersecurity requirements as part of procurement agreements and ongoing compliance monitoring efforts. At the adaptive tier, organizations employ AI-driven supplier security risk assessment platforms, predictive third-party cybersecurity supply tracking tools, and automated vendor risk monitoring solutions to dynamically enforce supplier cybersecurity requirements and ensure real-time security compliance verification. Supplier security management is fully integrated into enterprise cybersecurity governance, ensuring that vendor cybersecurity compliance, supplier risk assessments, and third-party security governance remain continuously optimized. A global technology company at this level may use AI-powered vendor risk analysis platforms to assess supplier cybersecurity readiness, enforce automated security compliance validation, and dynamically adjust supplier cybersecurity requirements based on evolving security threats. Setting cybersecurity requirements for suppliers aligns with multiple controls in the National Institute of Standards and Technology Special Publication 800-53, ensuring that organizations implement structured vendor security governance frameworks and dynamic third-party cybersecurity risk assessment models. One key control is SA-12 Supply Chain Risk Management, which requires organizations to establish formal supplier cybersecurity policies, enforce third-party security compliance requirements, and continuously monitor vendor security performance. A government contractor implementing this control may require all suppliers handling classified or sensitive information to meet strict cybersecurity compliance frameworks before entering into procurement agreements. Another key control is CA-2 security assessments, which mandates that organizations conduct regular supplier cybersecurity evaluations, ensuring that vendors adhere to predefined security standards and compliance requirements. A financial institution implementing this control may establish a structured third-party security compliance verification program, requiring vendors to undergo annual cybersecurity audits and continuous monitoring to maintain compliance with financial industry security regulations. Setting cybersecurity requirements for suppliers also aligns with SR-6 supplier security requirements, which mandates that organizations establish and enforce standardized security policies for vendors, ensuring that all suppliers meet predefined cybersecurity expectations before engaging in business partnerships. This control ensures that organizations apply consistent cybersecurity enforcement across all third-party suppliers, reducing the risk of vendor security vulnerabilities. A multinational logistics company implementing this control may establish tiered vendor security requirements, ensuring that high-risk suppliers comply with advanced security measures such as multi-factor authentication, encrypted data transfers, and continuous security monitoring. These controls can be adapted based on organizational size, industry, and cybersecurity maturity. A small business may implement basic supplier security policies, ensuring that vendors handling customer data or IT services follow cybersecurity best practices, such as strong password policies and encrypted communications. A large enterprise may deploy AI-driven vendor cybersecurity compliance tracking platforms, automated third-party security audits, and real-time supplier risk analysis solutions to ensure that supply chain security enforcement dynamically evolves based on changing risk landscapes. Organizations in highly regulated industries such as finance, healthcare, and defense contracting may require continuous supplier security audits, executive-led vendor cybersecurity governance reviews, and industry-specific security compliance mandates to ensure adherence to national and international cybersecurity standards. Auditors assess supplier cybersecurity requirements by reviewing whether organizations have structured, documented, and continuously enforced vendor security policies. They evaluate whether organizations implement structured supplier security enforcement models, maintain continuous vendor security compliance tracking, and integrate supplier cybersecurity verification processes into enterprise risk management frameworks. If an organization fails to set cybersecurity requirements for suppliers, auditors may issue findings highlighting gaps in vendor security governance, weak supplier cybersecurity enforcement, and failure to align third-party security requirements with regulatory compliance frameworks. To verify compliance, auditors seek specific types of evidence. Supplier cybersecurity policy documentation and structured vendor security agreement records demonstrate that organizations formally define and enforce structured third-party security governance models. Third-party security audit reports and supplier security compliance tracking records provide insights into whether organizations proactively monitor vendor cybersecurity performance and refine supplier security policies based on real-time risk intelligence. Incident response evaluations related to supplier security failures and third-party security risk mitigation reports show whether organizations effectively track vendor supplier security risks, ensuring that supplier security obligations remain continuously enforced. A compliance success scenario could involve a global cloud services provider that undergoes an audit and provides evidence that supplier cybersecurity requirements are fully defined, ensuring that structured vendor security compliance frameworks are in place, supplier security enforcement mechanisms are continuously monitored, and supplier cybersecurity risk management remains aligned with regulatory and industry security standards. Auditors confirm that third-party security risks are systematically managed, vendor security compliance is actively enforced, and supplier cybersecurity policies align with enterprise cybersecurity governance framework. In contrast, an organization that fails to establish structured supplier security requirements, neglects vendor cybersecurity compliance tracking, or lacks formalized supplier security governance models may receive audit findings for poor supplier risk management, weak third-party security enforcement, and failure to integrate supplier security policies into enterprise cybersecurity governance strategies. Organizations face multiple barriers in ensuring that cybersecurity requirements for suppliers are effectively set and enforced. One major challenge is lack of consistency in supplier security enforcement, where organizations fail to apply uniform security policies across different vendor categories, leading to security vulnerabilities in unregulated supplier networks. Another challenge is failure to align supplier security requirements with enterprise cybersecurity objectives, where vendor security policies are defined separately from internal security governance, creating gaps in third-party security risk management. A final challenge is over-reliance on vendor self-assessments, where organizations allow suppliers to define their own cybersecurity compliance without independent verification, increasing the risk of security misrepresentations and unmitigated vulnerabilities. Organizations can overcome these barriers by developing structured supplier security governance models, ensuring that vendor security compliance remains continuously enforced, and integrating supplier cybersecurity risk assessments into enterprise-wide cybersecurity frameworks. Investing in automated third-party security compliance tracking platforms, predictive supplier risk assessment models, and AI-driven vendor security analysis tools ensures that organizations dynamically assess, monitor, and refine supplier security enforcement strategies in real time. Standardizing supplier security governance methodologies across departments, subsidiaries, and external business partners ensures that vendor security policies are consistently applied, reducing exposure to third-party cyber threats, and strengthening enterprise-wide supply chain security resilience. By embedding supplier security requirements into enterprise cybersecurity governance strategies, organizations enhance vendor security accountability, improve regulatory compliance, and ensure sustainable supplier risk management strategies across evolving cybersecurity landscapes. That wraps up today's discussion on framework. Don't stop here. Head over to cyberauthor.me to explore more cybersecurity topics and discover a best-selling book covering NIST and other critical cyber frameworks. Please like, rate, and review this episode on Apple and Spotify. Until next time, remember that knowledge is power.